Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Khaledi. That was very invigorating and enlightening. And despite he slightly misled you, though I do write about international law, wrote quite a bit about it this summer and its application in this military aerial and ground assault of the Gaza Strip. Yet again, that is not going to be the topic of my discussion, though I'll touch on it, and I'm happy to touch on it as well during the Q&A. Instead, in this discussion, I'm going to do something a bit brazen and try to discuss the history of the Gaza Strip and this assault in front of the historian, so if you'll allow me. And I'm going to need help with the PowerPoint, because this tech thing, I'm supposedly a millennial, but I'm part of my parents' generation of how to work this. And that may be an insult to my parents' generation. Okay. But this summer we witnessed unprecedented violence meted upon a stateless, defenseless, besieged population. The Gaza Strip is only 365 square kilometers big and home to 1.8 million Palestinians. 1.2 of them are refugees from only a few kilometers north, a few kilometers east, and some south. Its dense constitution makes any attack on the Gaza Strip an attack on the entire population, with nowhere to hide and prevented from fleeing and becoming refugees. The Palestinian population was arbitrarily subjected to a killing campaign for, I say, 53 days by the 11th most powerful military in the world, certainly the strongest military power in the Middle East, a nuclear-capable power with the unequivocal military, economic, and diplomatic support of the world's superpower. The results can only be devastating, as indeed they were. 2,152 killed, 504 of them children. 143 families lost at least 3 members in that family. 1,500 Palestinian children have become orphans. 18,000 homes have been destroyed. 108,000 to be precise, have become homeless. At the height of the onslaught, 28% of the population became internally displaced again. And today, 58,141 persons remain displaced and are taking shelters in 19 UNRWA schools. Consider that in addition, 22 UNRWA schools were destroyed, 118 damaged, and as a result of this destruction, children in Gaza could not begin school 3 weeks ago, but instead only began school this week. And instead of having the first week of instruction, they spent this week mourning the loss of their classmates. 373,000 Palestinian children in Gaza are now in need of psychosocial treatment. Israeli forces attacked the basic infrastructure necessary for survival, including Gaza's sole power plant and its largest sewage treatment plant, which meant that during these 53 days, in addition to the flow of blood and the sprout of corpses, 15,000 tons of solid waste also leaked onto Gaza's streets. It destroyed 419 businesses, 36 fishing boats, 42,000 acres of farmland, exacerbating the unemployment rate before the start of this attack, which was 45%. And if you just consider unemployment of the Palestinians aged 20 to 24, unemployment is 70%. And Israel targeted civilians directly as well, putting to rest the question of whether or not Hamas used Palestinians as human shields when Israel targeted 7 UNRWA schools. In one instance in Jabalia, UNRWA provided the GPS coordinates to Israeli forces no less than 17 times. And they targeted that school, providing shelter to 3,000, killing 17, including 4 children. In Shaja'iyya, it was worse. There was an explicit campaign of revenge killing, and similar to what's been termed as the Dahi Doctrine in 2006 in Lebanon, has been termed the Hannibal Doctrine, which is the all-out assault to kill and shoot as much as possible in the case where an Israeli soldier is considered captured. Captured as opposed to kidnapped, because in warfare you can capture soldiers, and that is a very legal tactic, and to do it through a network of tunnels. It killed 150 in Rafah in similar fashion, and shot dead civilians fleeing in the back in Khuza'a. And in one of the most chilling episodes, in mid-July, 2 Israeli missiles consecutively and coldly killed Ismail, Zakaria, Ahid, and Muhammad Bakr, aged 9 through 11, as they played on Gaza's mutilated shores. The worst part of these casualties is that it wasn't the first time that Palestinians in Gaza would endure the horror of being held captive without shelter and subject to a massive killing campaign with modern, precise weapons technology. Worse, perhaps, is that this will not be the last time. The ceasefire established on August 26th is vague, it lacks any implementation mechanisms, and it is almost identical to the Egyptian brokered ceasefire established in November 2012 between Israel and Hamas. The 53-day onslaught did nothing to alter the status quo for Palestinians or for Israelis. And yet, unless a political agreement is achieved and ushers a viable solution to the conflict, which Israel has explicitly rejected, this will be repeated. Which is not to say that nothing has been accomplished. For Palestinians, it was a show of resistance, a powerful demonstration that they will not be bombed into submission, and a momentary show of national unity across legal and physical bifurcations violently separating Palestinians from one another. For Israelis, this recurring campaign has become necessary to maintain its domination. Rather than reflect its power, this brute force, and by the way, an escalating brute force, evidences the weakness of Israel's hegemonic project. In contrast to the relative success of settler colonialism here in the United States and arguably in Canada, and success meaning that we take it for granted. In Palestine, Palestinians make sure that it is not taken for granted, similar to how South Africans made sure it was not taken for granted. And similar to how communities from the Maori in Australia and indigenous people here continue to contest that we take settler colonialism for granted. But Israel has now constructed a situation in which it has no choice but to pursue these campaigns. They cannot pummel Palestinians into submission, although not for a lack of trying. They have rejected a political solution and a two-state solution, as evidenced by discussions that there will never be a retreat from the West Bank, and that look what happened in Gaza when we gave them freedom. And although they would like to, they cannot reoccupy the Gaza Strip physically, although that occupation, according to Article 43 of the Hague Regulations, which is based on a test of effective control, has never ceased. But they cannot physically reoccupy Gaza in the way that they occupy the West Bank with the presence of settlers and military infrastructure. as was repeatedly explained by former finance minister and existing Knesset member Yuval Steinitz. Because despite all obstacles, under the siege, Hamas has managed to develop its military capability into an organized paramilitary force in the Gaza Strip. Once Israeli boots were on the ground, they immediately lost their military advantage, as Hamas was able to use its network of tunnels in order to surprise attack Israeli forces, and in fact killed 66 Israeli soldiers. Its rockets, in contrast, and mortars killed 5 Israeli civilians, including 1 Israeli child and a Thai foreign worker. So in light of these foreclosed possibilities, no reoccupation with boots and military infrastructure, no political solution, no pummeling of the Palestinian population into submission, Israel has aggressively pursued, especially since its disengagement in 2005, a military counterinsurgency strategy in Gaza marked by remote control and low-intensity combat most of the time, and with merciless military campaigns aimed at mowing the lawn that Nadia described regularly and sometimes. But Israel's campaign against the Gaza Strip is not Gaza-specific, it is Palestine-specific. It's built on the twin axioms that guide Israeli policy, namely to obtain the maximum amount of Palestinian land with the minimum amount of Palestinians on it, and to concentrate the maximum number of Palestinians onto a minimum amount of land. Israel has successfully done this in the West Bank since 1967 under the veneer of a peace process, and it sped up this campaign during the Second Intifada. And here I will show you in images what I wouldn't be able to capture in words sufficiently. Here is the green line demarcating the West Bank, and through especially the veneer of the peace process, Israel has demarcated areas A, which is under complete Palestinian control, or 6%, areas B, under Palestinian civilian control and Israeli military control, area C, which is under full Israeli military and civilian control, 62% of the West Bank. Under the veneer of the peace process, Israel has tripled the number of its settlements and its outposts, which are slated for settlement construction. Add to that in addition to this land that has been confiscated, the maximum amount of land with the minimum amount of Palestinians, you have the apartheid wall, which runs, 85% of it runs in the West Bank, confiscating another 13% of this occupied territory. In effect, Palestinians remain concentrated in these lands here. We've concentrated the maximum amount of Palestinians into the minimum amount of land. These areas are Area C. This area here is the Jordan Valley, and it's declared a military zone. And through the maldistribution of resources, first and most importantly of which is water, farmers cannot live there, and instead Israel has built, with the presence of only 6,000 settlers, a $1 billion palm date industry. Here is what that would look like in the West Bank and what has been done since 1967. But inside what's known as something random, Israel proper, which is the name given to Israel because it has never declared its borders and yet to declare its borders, Israel is pursuing the same policy against its Palestinian, Muslim, and Christian citizens. And of course, I won't be able to do justice to this in the way that Attorney Suhad Bshara would be able to do with much greater sophistication, but let me just say that this policy is rampant within Israel as well, vis-a-vis its own citizens, We have seen this in the form of reducing the population altogether by the ban on family reunification. We are seeing this in the form of the PRAR plan, which suggests to remove 70,000 Palestinian citizens of Israel located in the south of Israel, or the Naqab, the Negev desert, and to relocate them into urban townships where they'll be concentrated. In their place, Israel, the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, will plant a forest, and Israel will build Jewish-only settlements within Israel. And 2 days ago, the Israeli High Court found that the Admissions Committee's law, which permits individuals to exclude others from living with them because of social unsuitability, as constitutional. Note that this should not be confused. This is a proxy for the exclusion of Palestinians to live in mixed housing with their Jewish counterparts within Israel, where they are all citizens. And this is extremely important because the High Court itself said that Palestinians could live in Jewish neighborhoods, mostly in 434 communities in the Negev and in the Galilee, in the Qa'dan case in 2000, that it said you cannot exclude Palestinian families from living in these Jewish communities within Israel. And now, 14 years later, the High Court itself said that yes, you can exclude Palestinians, thereby increasing the concentration of the Palestinian population. How does this then apply? Oh, and let me show you a map then of the Negev. This is the Negev today, and you can see these plans of concentrating Palestinians within Israel. And I couldn't find a suitable map, maybe I should ask you about this afterwards, of concentration of Palestinian communities, mostly in the Galilee where this is most rampant. Okay, so how does this then apply in Gaza, where Israel couldn't do this by a formal occupation and the expansion of settlements, and hasn't done it by laws that applies to its civilian population. It's done it as a form of warfare. And here you see that in the context of this last onslaught, Israel has expanded its buffer zone of the already tiny Gaza Strip to 44% of Gaza. So now they live in even smaller amounts of land, and you can see that in Shuja'iyya and Beit Hanun, the sites of the most intense massacres, that they were cleared out of the way to make room for an expanded buffer zone and the increasing concentration of Palestinians on smaller and smaller amounts of land. This campaign is not a campaign against Palestinians in Gaza. It is a campaign against all of Palestinians. Can I get the lights? I'm done with this slide. Thank you. So, why then is the campaign in Gaza so violent and different what it is in the West Bank and elsewhere? It's not for a lack of trying. In fact, Israel first occupied the Gaza Strip in 1956 for 4 months, but then, under U.S. pressure, was forced to end its occupation. So Israel had its eyes set on Gaza in a similar way that it has set on the rest of Mandate Palestine. But we return, and occupation actually ensues in 1967. Israel builds its first settlement in the Gaza Strip in 1970 in Kafar Durum. And in 1969, a year before, Ariel Sharon is appointed the head of Israel's Southern Command, giving him jurisdiction over Gaza. Why Ariel Sharon at this time? Gaza has always been a site of intense resistance. And in 1969, it was a site of intense guerrilla resistance, arguably encouraged by Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt, as opposed to the Jordanian monarchy, which repressed that kind of resistance in the West Bank. But under Sharon's pacification plan between 1970 and 72, Israeli forces divided the Gaza Strip into squares and proceeded to systematically, square by square, house by house, capture and interrogate military suspects. And between July and December 1971, Israeli forces killed 742 Palestinian guerrilla fighters, not counting those that it deported illegally or held in detention in the Sinai. Israel at this time also embarked on an urban planning campaign that set the stage for the occupation of the Gaza Strip, including 200 miles of security roads and the displacement of 16,000 refugees. In December 1981, Israel establishes direct control of Gaza's non-security sectors, including health, education, and welfare, and in response, Gaza's professional sectors, which had hitherto dominated its municipality, go on strike until 1991. The point is, Gaza was supposed to be just like the West Bank that we see today. In both places, we're not supposed to ever see Palestinian self-determination and self-rule. But this campaign failed in Gaza, whereas it prevailed in the West Bank, because, in large part, because of resistance. And that resistance was not always waged by Hamas, contrary to popular opinion and the mangling that Professor Khalidi referred to. The roots of Hamas stretch back to 1973, when Sheikh Ahmed Yassin established the Muslim Brotherhood faction in the Gaza Strip, and then it was a charitable alms program only. And it was established with the acquiescence of Israel, but not created by Israel, contrary to some public opinion, as a counterforce to Fatah and the PLO. But Hamas as we know it today, as the Islamic resistance movement, isn't formally established and announced until 1988. And its military wing doesn't carry out its first operation until 1989, where it captures and kills 2 Israeli soldiers. Now mind you, this is also in the context of the first Intifada, and which might be a misnomer because of the resistance of Palestinians many times before that. But in this context, in 1991, Israelis enter into secret peace negotiations with Palestinians to establish a political solution. At the same time, in 1991, the Gulf War has taken place. Yasser Arafat supports Saddam Hussein's occupation of Kuwait for reasons we can discuss. And as a result, when this is over, Kuwait expels Palestinians from Kuwait and returns many of them that can return to the Gaza Strip in secondary forced displacement that we've seen many times before in Libya, in Iraq, and now in Syria. But that expulsion was detrimental to the Gazan economy, which 50% of which was dependent on those remittances. Together with the fact that this is the moment when Israel also starts to import foreign labor to replace Palestinian labor within Israel, we are seeing the worst economic downturn in the Gaza Strip, not as a result of the recent siege, but since 1991. And in fact, where in 1991, before the Gulf War, approximately 9,800 Palestinian families are dependent on UNRWA for aid and food aid for survival, at the end of it, that number skyrockets to 120,000. It settles in 1993 at 80,000, and now as a result of this war, 830,000 Palestinians are dependent on on UNRWA for food aid in order to survive. In March 1993, in the context of this downturn and the dependence, making Gaza into a dependent entity that cannot self-sustain itself, Israel creates the first complete siege of the Gaza Strip in 1993, and we've only seen variations of that since then. Significantly, 9 months later in December 1993, or September 1993, the peace process is signed on the the Oslo Accords are signed on the White House lawn. None of this is coincidence. In December 1993, it was Shimon Peres who announced that the Gaza Strip would become the independent Palestinian state, and that the West Bank would be home to both settlers and Palestinians, and that borders would later be defined. So we have been seeing a campaign that is fulfilling this prophecy. So in 1993, Israel has made Gaza dependent, announced an intention to transform it into a Palestinian state, and has sealed it off to the point where even though there are no rocket attacks and no suicide attacks. The first suicide attack takes place in 1994. The first rocket attack doesn't happen until 2001. So there's no space to go into then how Israel continues exactly this project, but suffice it to say that it chooses military campaigns. Here's the expanded buffer zone again. It chooses military campaigns as opposed to the all-out occupation. And here we see that right before Israel's unilateral disengagement in 2005, Israel launches 8 military campaigns against the Gaza Strip to create buffer zones in the north and the south, and to assassinate a number of Palestinian leadership. Since 2005 in the present, here we count 14 military campaigns against the Gaza Strip. What we've seen of the 3, we count them as 3 of the campaigns in the past 8 years, is only a continuation of this story. And we're only seeing an escalation of it. Since then, we know the story since 2005, unilateral disengagement, Hamas's electoral victory, the ouster of Fatah from the Gaza Strip, the imposition of the siege, the breaking of the first peace process, this first ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in November 2008, again breaking that ceasefire in November 2012, and then now what we see again, another breaking of that ceasefire. Where is this all going? It's not going anywhere. Israel and Palestinians are now in a holding position. What we're seeing today is where Israel has cornered itself by rejecting all possibilities, and now these military campaigns have become a matter of necessity. But Palestinians, of course, their support for it internationally is waning, and its ingenuity of being able to justify it isn't holding much water, and we can talk about how it's used, how it's actually transforming the law, humanitarian law, and laws of self-defense in order to justify the unjustifiable. But Palestinians are not that much better. The unity government that Israel opposed is not up to par and doesn't have any real potential to resist this ongoing campaign. And the fissures in the ongoing Arab uprisings and throughout the Arab world more broadly limit the prospects for change. The most radical discussions being had today are discussions about taking Israel to the ICC, which is not that radical at all and can actually be counterproductive. I'm happy to discuss that in Q&A. And the PA itself can't really change course because it's so dependent on the US. 1/3 of its national budget comes from the United States, and its public sector is about 40% of its population, meaning that changing course from US dependence means an uprising amongst the Palestinians against them. BDS is an excellent tactic, but BDS is only a tactic, and it has to fit within a larger frame of legal and media tactics in a broader national liberation strategy, which has yet to come to the fore. So where we're at today, unfortunately, is a holding position. It's not clear where it's going, and frankly, the real question is, when is going to be the next eruption, and will that next eruption provide an opportunity to actually change the status quo in meaningful ways? Thank you.